Okay, then let's get cracking. I made a few little tweaks to the exam vigilance course today. We're adding more content to that. We're actually going to stick in some extra sort of study skills stuff to help you study at home, give you some more guidance on action hours and stuff like that to help keep focus, basically, because there's going to be lots of, it's tricky sometimes to keep focus with all the distractions that are going on right now. For those of you that just want to keep ticking along and doing your getting on with some A-level content. Good morning. Okay, so I also want, whilst we're just starting off and numbers are rolling up, I want to know what would you like us to do during these sessions? What would you want to see from tailored tutors over the next couple of months? Do you want any more like lifestyle kind of stuff? Do you want some like sort of check in, ask me anythings? You want to know what mustache wax I use, or like which traveling countries, or information on gap years, or what was my uni experience like? Like, would you like to, we're looking at interviewing some students. We could do some sort of study with me exam papers as well, like full cycles of the TT method, where we do the paper and we do that under time conditions, and then we mark it under time conditions, and we really hard questions. Okay, so I mean, any of my students at any point can, if they find a really hard question, submit it to me, and I can do that in my live classes. I'm going to be doing some more drop-in style study help as my live classes for the other subscribers, but the stuff that we can do on these sessions. Application questions, yes, we can. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to sort of finish the content with you guys first, because application questions are going to require you to know it, basically. I mean, people say they find application questions hard, but unless you understand it, you can't really apply it. So getting to the point where you understand everything is kind of the base one, and then we can look at applying it. But yeah, we can just do that for sure. Past papers, content recap. Maybe I could give you some exam technique type stuff where I do sort of 5 words per mark kind of style, where I'm just like blitzing through a paper and sort of showing you where I'm picking up things and why I would choose to put certain points in there. 2019 papers are usually public. I don't actually know when this year, who knows? Typically they're released beginning of April. I haven't filmed all mine yet because of all the madness. I was just in the process of filming mine, and then I had to move countries twice. And yeah, mine are not all finished. The point of them holding the 2019 papers back is so that schools can use them as mock exams. So they're basically not put into the general circulation, so students can't just like read the mark schemes. So the teachers can use them as like genuine. Same with the set 2 specimen papers. Okay. So this speciation, we've actually covered a fair bit of this already. I'm just going to like hammer the points home with you so you kind of get the headline facts. Is quite a formulaic answer. There's 2 types of speciation. What are the 2 types of speciation? 2 sort of classifications of speciation, and how are they different? Geographically isolated, which is called allopatrics, and not geographically isolated, so in the same place at the same time, sympatric speciation. Okay. Precisely. Yeah, so either way, they are going to be reproductively, is probably a better way of saying it, isolated from one another. They won't be interbreeding. If gene pools can interbreed, there will be a flow of genes between them, and they will basically stay as one group. But if you can separate the 2 groups so that they're not interbreeding, they're not spreading genes between themselves by mating anymore, then they're allowed to basically go off in their own direction, and they'll go in the direction of whichever way the environment shapes them. If one area is wetter than the other and one area is drier, then Obviously, those plants might grow deeper roots because they need the water, and these plants might grow like larger leaves because they can have more stomata and afford to lose more water, but that gives them a photosynthesis gain over them. So like basically the environment will then shape the differences. So I'd say, yeah, any kind of speciation basically results in them not interbreeding. That might be their choice. It might be that some of them are paler and some of them are darker. And the darker ones choose to mate with the darker ones. The paler ones choose to mate with the paler ones. And it's just a behavioral, it's just a decision. It's like a sexual selection, but for whatever reason, they stop interbreeding. They might be right next to each other. So a really interesting way of thinking about this is, have you ever heard of a ring species? Oh, I can't even remember. There's a type of salamander in the desert in America. But I'm going to give you the example I've got a better example of, and it's the herring gull and the lesser black gull in the UK and Western Europe. Two distinct species. One has got a black back, one's got a grey back. They nest in similar locations, but they don't interbreed with each other. They are effectively two different species. According to the biological species, do they interbreed? No. Can they produce fertile offspring? Well, actually, what happens if you go around the same latitude, I think 40 to 60 degrees north of the equator, you go all the way around the globe. In Western Europe, they're different. They look different. They choose not to mate from each other. But it's actually a continuous breeding population. If you go to the other side of the planet, you'll actually see there's an intermediate phenotype where they are the same. So there's basically just somewhere in the middle, and that everyone's breeding with their neighbors east-west around that ring. But at the two opposite extremes of the phenotype where they meet up again on the other side of the world, and they've gone in one direction, they've gone to be black, and one in direction, they've gone to be gray. And where they come to overlap, they're sufficiently different in terms of phenotype that they don't interbreed anymore. So there is gene flow between them all the way around, and it's called a ring species. So geographically, you are seeing in three-dimensional space what normally happens over time. Normally, that's obviously speciation is a continuous process generation to generation. Every generation would have been able to interbreed with its previous generation. The little thought experiment I did with you the other day, you go back enough generations, you're like a fish, you're an amphibian, you're a reptile, like you're a totally different species. So forget species, genera, class, order, like way back, and obviously go back far enough, we go back to single-celled organisms. So ring species are great examples of how speciation works. So yeah, super interesting. So again, our definition of species is we like to put things into nice, neat little categories. This is this species. This is this species. In reality, it's all a bit loosey-goosey. Anyone who can try and interbreed with someone else, they'll generally have a go. It might not work out that well. Sometimes it does work out, and some genes get passed over successfully. Sometimes a lot of them die. There's a lot of looseness. The biological species concept is not perfect. Okay, so let's make some notes after I've given you some nice higher level, interesting biology, according to me anyway. I'm going to just give you the stand-up notes on speciation. This is pretty golden when you actually get to questions like this, because the questions are very, very similar every time you get to this. So what is speciation? Well, the word "tion" tells us that it's a process. Zooming on in this app is super weird, especially when I'm holding my Apple Pencil. Doesn't like it. Speciation. I'm going to say it's the process of forming a new species. So basically, when populations become reproductively isolated, there's no gene flow, mating between them. Populations become, I think it's important enough to say, What do we mean by gene flow? Sex, sexual intercourse, mating, passing on, sexual reproduction. If things can interbreed, they'll give it a damn good go. It's pretty much a universal constant in the world of biology. And there's two types that we've mentioned already. We've got allopatric. We have sympatric. Okay, so allopatric, you're going to end up with geographical isolation or geographically isolated. So maybe a mountain range over millions of years springs up between them, or a river divides the two populations, or I actually won't go down the lines of founder effect, or maybe there's a storm and one population is on an iceberg that moves dramatically from one part of the ocean. They can't get back to the other population. So it's the geographical isolation that causes the reproductive isolation. Because they are physically in different locations. And these are not geographically isolated, but they are reproductively isolated for some other reason. Usually it's behavioral, but always they're reproductively isolated. Otherwise they'll keep mating and they'll keep sharing genes, and their gene pool will remain one large gene pool. There'll be great variation in it, presumably. Might be massive phenotypic variation in it, but as long as genes can still flow, they'll stay in the same club, basically. Let's pause this here. Okay, so what types? Let's go some examples of sympatric. I've put morphological in my notes here. I'm going to put seasonal. So maybe plants, sometimes plants generally have male reproductive plants and female reproductive plants, and they don't necessarily want to self-fertilize. They would rather be fertilized by another plant, so to increase their genetic diversity, to mix up their genes. So they sometimes the anthers and will be active at different times to the flowers. And so this can cause like a time shift. So if they're not on the same phase as the other plants, then you can end up with a phasing. They're in the same place all year, but some of them are only reproductively active at certain times of the year. So so basically they're reproductively active at different times. This is generally going to be plants. It could be behavioral. So like crickets, different courtship behavior, different courtship song. Or mating rituals, basically. I'm gonna put crickets, is obviously it's not exclusively crickets or cicadas or anything like that. Yeah, let's just dive in here. I don't think I need to delve into that much detail. Okay, so basically, why? Well, we have variation exists in the population. So we have our starting population. It's one population, one species. Population. How does the variation exist? Well, it's due to mutations. So there's multiple different alleles of each different gene. There's different genotypes, there's different phenotypes. This is the starting population of which they're not all genetically identical. They're not all clones. There's variation in there. And then they end up being isolated. So there's in these different environments or different courtship behaviors or different seasons, there are different selection pressures. So I'll give you some examples there. That could be, e.g., it could be environmental conditions if it's geographically isolated. But it could also be those different courtship behaviors. So it could be they'd be responding to different songs, or maybe some are nocturnal and some are diurnal. So some are going to be better adapted to living at night, or it'll be advantageous to be adapted to living at night, and others would be different. Well, I mean, so you could have different environmental conditions, even if it's a behavioral adaptation that's going on. Different. I'm going to just put courtship behavior again. So you basically have selection. To those of you that do AQA and OCR, what type of selection is it that's going to change the mean of the allele frequency? You're going to have, I kind of want to include the word, but it's not something that EdXL students need to know. You're going to have selection of different phenotypes. It is directional. So I'm going to just put directional in brackets. EdXL students, you don't need to know the different types of selection pressures, but directional selection of different phenotypes. What really is genotypes and phenotypes, but it's the phenotypes that are being selected. It's the physical organism. Do you survive or do you not survive? And obviously that's controlled by the genes. We can again go back to this differential reproductive success. Yeah, with stabilizing selection, well, if we just look at our standard distribution, and this could be, let's say, height of the organism. Most people are average height. Some people are tall and some people are short. If there's an advantage to being tall, well, okay, so generally speaking, the downsides of being overly tall is that you've got to find more food, maybe because you're a bigger organism, you have more cells, more respiration. So at this end, the reason selecting against this end here, if you're being extremely tall, is like basically finding enough food, or maybe just finding a mate because you're so large that it's just not feasible. And down here, and the disadvantage of being really small is maybe that you have a higher surface area to volume ratio, you dissipate too much heat and you can't maintain your core body temperature. There could be many things, like the typical one in the AQA spec is actually birth weight. Disadvantage of being too big is it's most likely to cause complications during birth. Complications of being too small is that you're too premature, and that stabilizing selection means that the extremes of the population are at a disadvantage, and therefore there's fewer of the individuals on the edge, basically, and therefore the mean doesn't change over time. Nothing changes, basically. The mean stays the same because the extremes of the population are equally disadvantaged, or not necessarily equally, but they're disadvantaged, and it's most advantageous to be in the middle. However, you flip the environment suddenly, and suddenly there is an advantage to being a large baby at birth, because all the small babies get eaten by wolves, and if you're big enough, you are able to, I don't know, not fit in the wolf's mouth or something like that. There's suddenly there's a reason to be big. And so suddenly you're more likely to survive if you're in this, and that's going to cause the mean, that's going to shift the allele frequency in this direction, because the alleles that control being small are more likely to be bred out. And so this would be directional selection, because suddenly one end of the phenotype, one phenotype is succeeding better than the other end of the phenotypes, and therefore the mean is going to shift in that direction. So that's the red is the directional, when selection is pushing the genotype in a new direction because there's an advantage of doing that. Stabilizing selection is just like the environment's the same, the medium, what we've come up with, this middle size is perfect. If we get any bigger, there's a disadvantage. If we get any smaller, there's a disadvantage. So the mean just stays the same. The third type is disruptive selection, but I'm not going to go into that right now. The third type is where basically, very, very simply, disruptive selection is where either extreme is at a benefit and being in the middle is a disadvantage. So if you imagine rabbits living on a chessboard, you've got white rabbits and you've got black rabbits. Either could be camouflaged. White rabbits can be camouflaged on the white, black rabbits can be camouflaged on the black, but being a gray rabbit is being intermediate in phenotype. Being in the middle there is no benefit. You can't hide anywhere. So that's where either extreme of the population is not a perfect example, but it gives you an idea, is so disruptive because the middle is selected against and both extremes are selected for. That's AQA students only. Where was I getting up to? Let's do this and do some questions. So we've got, again, different selection pressures, different individuals survive and reproduce. I'm going to say typically, I can't see the chat. Let's just bring that back up again. Differential reproductive success, differential. So the success of reproducing is different between those people with different genotypes. This causes a change in allele frequency. And we can say over many generations, or maybe over many. Okay. One that probably goes into this, that might be nice to look at, a practical example over here. Let's analyze the question with blue pen. Snow geese fly north to the Arctic in the spring for breeding. So they're going there to mate. Different colonies form at different latitudes. The greater the latitude, the further north. Okay, so basically different latitudes as we go up. The further north the breeding colony forms, the colder the temperature and the greater the risk of snow. Interesting use of the word risk, but okay. Latitude on our globe, if my TT is the globe here, then your latitude, the equator is 0. We are at about 40 degrees, latitude goes up. Yeah, longitude is the other one that goes down in segments like that. Okay, there is a positive correlation between the size of snow geese, size of the geese, and how far north they breed. A larger size results in snow geese being adapted for breeding in colder conditions. Give reasons for how. We've got 2 marks. Okay, so larger geese, we've got further north written here, and we've got colder conditions written here. So they're linking it to temperature for sure. So again, let's just look at this in the context. We're looking for give reasons. Let's rephrase this question. Give 2 reasons why there is a positive, I'm just going to use that as positive correlation between increase in size of geese and breeding further north. Okay, so our answer is, yeah, they have a smaller surface area to volume ratio because they're of larger size. The ratio decreases. Yes, their total surface area is bigger, but their surface area to volume ratio is smaller. Therefore, they lose less heat to the environment. We could maybe say per kilogram. It's not if you don't leave this, if you don't include the per kilogram, it's not true. A large goose will lose more total heat to its environment than a small goose, but as a proportion of its body mass, it will be a smaller amount of energy is lost. So it's, I mean, well, probably they are the 2 marks. How far north they breed. I don't think we want to talk about eggs and stuff like that. So I don't know. Therefore can survive in colder conditions, or maybe we'd replace that with breed because that's specifically what the question is mentioned it. You could maybe say more fat reserves, more insulation. If you're looking for additional things here, might be. I think this question is looking for surface area to volume ratio is where I think this question is going. I will share the mark schemes before you ask me. Let's give this some bullet points. I think this is the mark and this is the mark. I'm not sure, and I don't think this is the mark. But there's a neutral point. There's no harm in that being there. Snow geese are either white or blue in color. The table shows the percentages of white geese. So this is white geese in colonies at different latitudes, at times over a 40-year period. Blank cells are there where there's no data, basically. So we don't really have to worry about that. It's just no data. We've got percentage of white snow geese each year. I don't know why the column widths are a bit screwy here, but we've got time going in this direction. And we have latitude. So degrees north. Okay, so the bigger the number, the further north. So we're going north in this direction, further north. Okay, so describe is our command word, how the percentage of white snow geese varies with distance north. So we're not looking at time, we're only looking at as we go north. We've got 1 mark to get. It increases. The further north you go, the greater the percentage of white snow geese. A simple positive correlation would probably also get you a mark. Super simple. Okay, this is a skill that is being introduced more and more. I think I actually split this question over 2 pages because it didn't fit on my handout for my live class. But this is something all the examples are doing now. They are giving you questions based upon data, which is on a different page. This used to be against the rules. It's now obviously okay again, and they're doing it. So it's a skill to practice. The further north, the greater the risk of snow. Use this information to give reasons for how natural selection might have accounted for the effect of latitude on the percentage of white snow geese. Okay, so we've just described as latitude increases, the percentage of snow geese increase. So taking that description in mind, and we know that the further north we go, the greater the risk of snow happening is. So we want to give reasons how natural selection might have accounted for more white snow geese being at higher latitudes. Okay, so we've got better. I don't know how you spell camouflage either. Is that right? Have you spelled it the same as me? I've spelled it the same as you. So we'll stick with it until someone corrects us, Matilda. So yeah, get better camouflage in the snow. We should probably link that to the snow. So what's likely to go down? More likely to survive and reproduce? Why? Decrease in predation. They're not hunters, right? Yeah, I mean, if it was a hunting species, you could maybe say it would increase, it would be able to hunt more effectively, but decrease in predation. Therefore, is an increase in allele frequency. Or maybe we could say increase in the white allele frequency. We can be specific here. You could say that there's a decrease in the allele frequency of the gray owl. Yeah, you could, but you could put that either way around. You could say it's a selected disadvantage to be gray. Really? Breaking news. Is that true? I'm not going to say it because I have no context. I've been preparing my lesson. I'm going to try to remain apolitical here. As much as my political opinions. Maybe that's something you can ask me and then ask me anything. Okay, and let's do this one and I'll show you the mark scheme. So the percentage of white snow geese in these colonies changed over the period shown in the table. So again, we've got use your knowledge of climate change to suggest a reason. Explanation is a reason. So what happens? We're obviously going to need to see the data here. So we go from 1930, we're going up with time. So at high latitude, we still have 100, 100, 100. There's basically, we don't need to cover this data at all. We've got no data here. We've basically got 99, 99. There's not really much evidence of data there. So we don't have to pay too much attention there. Here we've got 95, 85, 75, and then no data. So this is, the trend is decreasing. 86, 75. Okay, so this is decreasing. And wow, okay, so there's almost probably not much snow left down at these latitudes. So first of all, we'd have to say it has changed, but they haven't told us how it's changed. So well worth stating, what is the change? There's a decrease in the percentage of white geese. And then, so climate change. I personally hate the phrase global warming. Yes, I'm sure you can say global warming here. I would say increase in in mean temperatures. I just find, in terms of communicating science, I find global warming, the climate's going to change. Some places are going to get colder. Some places are going to get warmer. Some places are going to get colder winters and hotter summers. It's going to change the climate. But yes, we can say that there'll be warmer temperatures, less snow on the ground, therefore less advantage, or less, being white will not be camouflaged anymore against the green or the brown of the soil, and therefore there's a decrease in allele frequency for the white feathers, or there's an increase in allele frequency of the blue feathers. Exactly. So not being white will no longer be a selective advantage, it would be a selective disadvantage. Okay, let's go check out that question. It was, they actually accredited both more fat Or that slash means or. You can't say both. To be honest, they are completely separate points. I have a little bit of a pet peeve when mark schemes do this. They are not related. I mean, the fact that I think they should, if they're going to say they are both valid things to say, I think they should be standalone points to say. So they lose less heat to their environment. So if you're saying this surface area to volume ratio, you have to use this bit here. And if you're saying more fat, then you have to say insulation. I would like to see this per kilogram, because it's not technically correct to say that a large goose loses less heat than a small goose. It's not true. It loses more heat per kilogram or per gram. Or the further north, the higher the latitude, the higher the percentage of white snow geese. Simple, that was a description. So then the snow lies longer, white geese better camouflaged. That's how you spell it, camo. I think we got it right, Matilda. A link to predation or to survival or to reproductive success. So pretty loose. So they actually wanted one about the snow lying longer at higher latitudes. And the decrease, the opposite of that was the final part of the question, the snow melts earlier, or there's less snow in general. You can make these points pretty basic. The whole point here of just trying to put short sentences on your answers is going to help you. What is the real point that we're trying to get at here? There's less snow. We don't have to be too fancy pants about it. We can just say there's less snow, or there's maybe snow is on the ground for a fewer number of months. White geese are decreasing because they are less well camouflaged, or they're at a disadvantage. Blue geese are increasing because they're more camouflaged, or they are at an advantage. You could definitely say selective advantage. This was an AQA question from way back when. This was one of the earliest new spec AQA papers. Okay, I'm going to see if there's another speciation question in here. Let's go back and have a look at that, because you can see how clear my notes line up to those questions, actually. Oh, geez, how has time got away from us so much? Okay, I'm going to rip through these because these are classics. And just look how similar. I'm going to analyze both of these questions first. Changes in ecosystems can lead to speciation. Okay, we're talking about speciation. In Southern California, 10,000 years ago, a number of interconnecting lakes contained a single species of pupfish, of fish. The species is irrelevant. Increasing temperatures caused evaporation and the formation of separate, smaller lakes at rivers and streams. This led to the formation of a number of different species of fish. Give reasons, explain how these species evolved. Rephrase the question for me. 5 marks. Rephrase the question. What is this question asking us to do in reality? Let's take away all the mumbo jumbo. Okay, you've identified it as allopatric because they are separate lakes. So what's the question? 3 words, I think. And then using the lakes, using the pupfish as examples. This is the rephrasing of the question. Obviously, they've not said allopatric speciation in the question. Whenever you see a question like doing its best to not use, then obvious, it might say, describe how a strand of messenger RNA is made in the nucleus. Well, there's a mark immediately for saying transcription. It's gone out of its way to not say transcription. Big flashing red signs, write the word transcription down because that's a mark. So here they've not said allopatric, so allopatric speciation is a mark. Whether you put it at the beginning, whether you put it at the end, doesn't matter. Now, before we answer that question, On Caribbean, these are real past paper questions, by the way. On a Caribbean island, there are almost 150 species of lizard belonging to the genus Anolis. So scientists believe that these species evolved from 2 species found on the mainland of the USA. Explain how the Caribbean species could have evolved. Okay, so what's going on here? So we've got, previously it was on the USA, now they're in Caribbean. On the islands of the Caribbean, geographically isolated or not geographically isolated? The same, they are geographically isolated. So this is allopatric. And I'm just going to do this next question over here. We've got Lord Howe Island in the Tasman Sea possesses 2 species of a palm tree, which has arisen, it's told us, by sympatric speciation. 2 species diverge from each other after the island was formed. Okay, so typically with islands, you're expecting geographical isolation, but it's told us very clearly sympatric, and it's after the island was formed 6.5 million years ago. So plenty of time for evolution to take place. The flowering times of the 2 species are different. Using this information, suggest how these 2 species of palm tree arose by sympatric speciation. Again, it's 5 marks. Again, this is a suggest question, but really it's a describe allopatric speciation using using this palm tree with different flowering times. Oh, if I could highlight the right bit, as our suggestions. Okay, so which bits can we use in common for all 3 of these answers? What was on my notes? What were my bullet points? Let's just do this in the chat and then. Okay, so allopatric, we're going to say they're geographically isolated. For sympatric, we're going to say they are reproductively isolated, but for both of them, actually, we're going to say they're reproductively isolated. But I want the commonalities first. Reproductively isolated. Variation exists in the population due to mutations. And so there's no flow of genes, there's no gene flow, no interbreeding between these populations. Yeah, all of that's great. Different selection pressures result in, generally, Angie, they say differential reproductive success, but you could probably say individually. You can put that in a much bigger sentence. If you don't like that as a phrase, you can say organisms with the phenotypes best adapted to their environment survive better and reproduce more. It's just, you can write 3 sentences on that, and when 3 words will generally do it. Causing a change in allele frequency over many generations. All of that is core to the speciation. Obviously, for the sympatric, you're going to say that they're in the same place. There's going to be a mark for saying that they're in the same place. How might that happen then with different reproductive times? So that might be seasons. And this is a suggest question, actually. That was a suggest question. So you're welcome to suggest that maybe one flowers in. You're not expected to know where that island is or what seasonality is, but you can suggest. It's a suggest question. You can say that one flowers in the winter, one flowers in the summer. The fact that it may not have a winter and a summer, it might be a wet season, dry season thing. But either way, you can make a suggestion for those suggest questions. It blooms it could be at different times of day, possibly. I think much more likely it's on a monthly cycle, but you don't know that, and there's no reason that you can make a suggestion. Maybe some flower at night, some flower at day. It's a suggest, so you've got a bit of wiggle room there. How would they end up diverging? There's going to have to be different selection pressures on them to some extent for them to diverge. Because if they're, what question number is this? This is 6 and 7. what process is it happening by? Another get natural selection in there, being like, when I'm self-checking my answers in my head, I'm going to be like, what key terms can I add? So natural selection, maybe something we could chuck in our answers. And eventually, what makes it a new species? It continues over many generations until, and maybe I didn't put that in my notes actually, something I could add to them. This continues until speciation. Could the plants reproduce asexually? Yeah, the plants, well, they wouldn't necessarily be asexual, but they could self-pollinate, which is not necessarily, because you're still going through meiosis to get some gene shuffling, and then you're fertilizing your own eggs and sperm. So it's a little bit different. Asexual is like mitosis, is cellular, is binary fission, where you just clone yourself. And this continues until speciation. What are we forming? We're forming a new species. What are species? Species are organisms with similar characteristics that are able to do what? Interbreed, to produce fertile offspring. So you might want to say that it continues until the populations are so different that they are unable to interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Okay, let me share the mark schemes. And I'm only 1 minute over. I'm going to be on time. What was question? Oh, okay. So we'll look at 6 first. These are both those question 6. These were both allopatric. Look how similar these two questions are. Geographical isolation, geographical isolation. Variation exists due to mutation. It's marking point 3 on this particular marking. Variation exists due to mutation. Different environmental, abiotic, biotic, or selection pressures. So different selection pressures, separate gene pools, different selection pressures is marking point 4 on this one. We've then got selection for different advantageous features. We could say differential reproductive success. You could say, if you prefer some of that other wording, just look at the wording there. Some students really don't like that phrase, or they don't really understand differential reproductive success. So just look at marking point 4 there. They're all the things that you're allowed to say. You can say it however you want. Leads to a change in, you must say allele, but a change in allele frequency. In fact, let me just do these one at a time. So we've got marking point 4 is selection for these different things. So this one is differential reproductive success. Again, here, again, we could basically say any of these 2 points here are basically interchangeable, more or less. Leads to a change in allele frequency. I would probably include until basically unable to breed to produce fertile offspring. Would be a nice end point for that. But I mean, that is how formulaic those answers are. Always link it back to the, look how, in fact, there's almost no mention of the lakes here at all. It's not great exam technique to just ignore the question completely. And there's no mention of the islands, the Caribbean islands here either. But it's good to link it back to the question where you can, but they're looking for the science as much as, zoom in, please. Come on, you can do it. Yeah, we go. So we've got sympatric, occurs in the same habitat, species, habitat, environment, or population. Mutations cause different flowering times. So we've got here, this is much more linked to the question. Why? I don't specifically know why they've demanded this. The command word was different. The command here was suggest. But again, we've got the mutations causing the differences. But this here, they have wanted it linked to flowering time. So that's why it's always good to link it to the question if you can, because if you don't, then you just regurgitate my standard answer, which is going to give you all the marking points as you need them. But if you need to link it to the question, then I can't predict the context of the question they're going to give you. It might be flowers, might be bees, might be snakes, might be islands, might be ocean, might be freshwater. They can ask it in many different contexts. But then you end up with reproductive isolation, or no gene flow, or the gene pools remain separate. Different alleles are selected. Again, they're really focusing on the alleles here, because that's everyone has the same genes at this point. It's just the alleles that are different. This, forget disruptive, this is AQA only. There's natural selection for everybody else. You can say natural selection is taking place. Eventually, and again, a different species cannot interbreed to produce fertile offspring. You can say they are not geographically isolated as well. So look how similar those answers are. This one's a bit more complex because you have to link it to the flowers. The mutations cause the change in flowering time. This is easy. Different alleles are passed on or selected, or there's a change in allele frequency. So this is like, some of those answers are just going to be the same each time. Could you, in that question, could you just say disruptive selection? Yeah, and for marking point 5, it would totally accept disruptive selection in that example. Yeah, because basically being in the middle wouldn't be much of an advantage. It's a bit of an unusual one. Let me just think. So you've got different flowering times. I mean, if you would take it to the extreme, let's say one flower only flowers in July and August, one flower only flowers in December, January. If you were intermediate, if you were somewhere in the middle, and if you were the only ones in April, then there's probably going to be nobody else to mate with. So that's why it's kind of disruptive selection. Either being in either camp is better than being somewhere in the middle. Mine was a bad explanation, or yours was a bad explanation? Yeah, what? Give me. I've got a few minutes before I have to log off. What are your teachers giving you to do right now? When the middle is not selected for. Okay, when I'd say that when the mean phenotype is not selected for, or there's an advantage for being at one of the extremes of the phenotype. Getting you to do essays. I mean, to be honest, if you're doing the essay planning, that is obviously going to be quite a lot of synthesis, pulling in lots of different parts of the spec. Doing tests. Yeah. Well, I might stick around on the chat a little bit here. I'm going to have to shut down the room so that we only have one YouTube account. Ronnie's going to be doing this in maths. It's important if you are doing maths, take a little break at this point. I'll just keep an eye on the chat, and I'll keep so on the YouTube page that you're on right now. So if you've got any comments, then yeah, I'll be there for a couple of minutes extra, and we can chat about what's going on and if there's any other ways that we can help you. So I will see you, if I can find the control room, see you on Monday.